Today I am bringing you all of my spoilery thoughts while reading Reaper's Gale, the 7th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Stephen Erickson. Why am I struggling to talk today? This is not a good start to the video, but today's video is going to be about Reaper's Gale by Stephen Erickson. That's all I really needed to say. If you are new to my channel, normally I can talk much more smoothly than this, but if you are new to my channel and you would like to catch up on any of my other Malazan videos, then I will have the playlist linked in the description. But today's video is about Reaper's Gale. My first impressions haven't been too positive, just to set expectations. The way that I'm going to structure this video is the same way that I've structured previous videos. I'm going to check in with you at the end of part 1, then the end of part 2, end of part 3, and then the end of the book. My partner Sam, who, if you don't know, I am buddy reading the series with my partner Sam. My name is also Sam, just to make things even more confusing. We have the same name. But he is a huge fan of the series. It's his favourite series of all time. He is going to be joining me for this video at some point, probably at the end of the video once we've finished the book. When I filmed my Bone Hunters vlog, he joined me for each update, and I really enjoyed filming it that way. However, I didn't enjoy editing that way. That video ended up being over an hour long, and also with the evenings getting darker, it's much harder for us to find a time where we can both film together. I'm okay to film in the day because I work from home. So for example, I'm filming this on my lunch break, or sometimes I can film before work or immediately after, but it's just easier to do it this way. So hopefully that's okay. You're stuck with me for the first 75% of the video. It does mean that I can be brutally honest and not worry about Sam being upset with me. Not that he would get upset with me for being honest, but you know what I mean. Like, he is a huge fan of this series, and unfortunately I haven't enjoyed this first part of Reaper's Gale. We're going to get into it, and I'll obviously go through each of the perspectives. Well, not all of them, but most of the perspectives and the groups that we're following. First of all, we're back in, is it Lether? Is that the name of the continent? I keep getting confused because you've got Lether, which I think is the name of the empire. The people are called the Lethari, and then the city I think is called Lethara. So hopefully I've got all of those in the right order. But we're back in this continent, this same continent from book 5, and Midnight Tides, so far I think is my favourite book in this series. I still didn't give it 5 stars, but really enjoyed it, and it was very close to being a 5 stars. So I like being back in this continent, and I like that we're learning a bit more about the east of the country. We've been seeing the perspective of characters who are in this city called Dren. We've been introduced to this new group of people called the All Dan. They seem to have been in conflict with the Lethari for generations. So there's some interesting stuff, some interesting information. I am someone who loves world building. If an author wants to tell me everything, all of the little details about their world, then sign me up. Absolutely okay with me. So it is interesting seeing how this continent, the political climate of this continent looks. I don't know how much time has passed since the end of Midnight Tides, but we're seeing how much things have changed, especially within the city of Letharis. The Eda won, but they're not really in charge. We've got this new police force that have come to power. They seem to be the ones that are running the show at the moment, the Patriotists. And it seems to be that this group is made up of the most horrendous people. I have not enjoyed those chapters, and there's a lot of new names to get my head around, which is something that I do find frustrating. We are 7 books into a series, and what I loved about Bone Hunters is I picked up the book, and at the start I looked through the character list and I recognised the majority of the names, and I thought, yes, this is going to be so much easier to get into. I did the same thing when I picked up Reaper's Gale, and again I thought, okay, I recognise most of these characters, but we're not focusing on familiar characters really. We've got some familiar characters that have come back into it, but there's just so much going on and so much that I'm having to get my head around, and I feel like it has affected my enjoyment. Obviously, as I go through the book and I get used to all of these new characters, then it might help, but some of these characters I just don't care about. Like, I don't care to read about these horrible men. I wrote some of the names down. Tanal Yath Vinar. Oh, at one point, and this is when I knew that he was not going to be a nice character. At one point, he says, or he thinks something to himself about how Jeren Eberict was a great man, and he's going off about how it was such a shame that he was killed by thugs, and this is the murderer from book 5, the horrible person that this new guy is now like aspiring to be, and he's just not a nice person. And I can read about unlikable people, but I don't enjoy it. And I feel like a lot of focus has been given to these horrible people. To Holland Book have briefly come back into it, and they were some of my favourite characters from Midnight Tides. There's something interesting going on because, so first of all, their main goal is to try and bankrupt the city, but Bug is doing something. There's these mechanisms that they're finding within, I think it's the foundations of the city, or there's something going on there. There are all of these pieces of this mechanism that are, no one knows how they fit together. We have this new character, Verit Sathad, who is indebted to Rortus Havenar, and he has a conversation with Bug as he's leaving, I think, to go to Dreen. He comes across Bug and they have a conversation, and he says to Bug, please tell this guy Havenar, tell him what you found, because we found something similar and maybe it all connects. I don't have a clue what's going on there, but I am definitely intrigued. Another main plot thread seems to be a lot of people are after the, what's it called? The Finest, which holds Scabandari Blood Eye's soul. So we see this in, I think it's the prologue. We see how Scabandari's soul is put into this Finest. We have a group of characters, including Silchas Ruin, who are trying to find this Finest. Silchas Ruin seems to only be interested in revenge. Fia Sengar is also with that same group, as well as Seren, Udanaz and Kettle. Fia Sengar also wants it for some reason, but I don't think we quite understand his motivations yet. Menador also wants it, and the Errant is also quite concerned about what's going to happen to it. But then there was an interesting conversation between Hanan Mozag where he's talking to Sukul and Kardu, and they're making a deal to work together. Sukul is very aware that there's probably going to be treachery at some point because they don't trust the crippled god. However, she is trying to raise Sheltartha Law, who's buried in the Azath house, and this is a flashback, or it's linked, sorry, to what happened in Midnight Tides. We saw Sukul and Menador bury their sister, half-sister, in the Azath house, and now Sukul has said, well, I'd rather work with Sheltartha anyway. There was one thing that Kettle said which I found really interesting. I've highlighted it and I'll try and put it on the screen, but she says the vast wheel is about to turn one last time before it closes, because that's how he made it to tell him the truth. And she's talking about how when she was near the Azath house, she would listen to the people who were buried there, and they were talking this prophecy, is what I'm going to assume it is. My initial thought when I read that was that it was somehow linked to Dragonpur, but I don't think there's a wheel in Dragonpur. For some reason I had this image of people pulling these chains, and I thought they were pulling a wheel, but they're not. They're pulling some kind of vehicle. Maybe I was thinking about the wheels on the vehicle, but I think this could be foreshadowing something to do with Akarium, because she then mentions something about the one who's coming, and we know that Akarium is being brought to this continent to go up against Rulad. So could that be foreshadowing that he's going to get his memory back? I think that could be a possibility. I'm sure it's been mentioned in one of the previous books that he built a clock tower or something, so could the wheel be related to that? I feel like it's in Darujastan, or maybe it was in book 2, they came across something that he'd built, and I feel like it was this tower and it had a clock on it, but I might be making that up. I'm also getting the feeling that the Kachain Chamale are going to play a much bigger role in this book. We've come across some settlements or some cities that seem to be old Kachain Chamale settlements, and also on the eastern side of the country towards that area we have the city of Dreen and this guy Red Mask, who it's been revealed he is the first sword of the Kachain Chamele. There was actually a really funny moment towards the beginning of the book where he's kind of travelling, he's walking along, and he's got these two Kachain Chamales with him, and he's kind of thinking to himself, I don't know why they seem so insistent on following me around everywhere, but I'm not going to complain. That little moment did make me smile, and I think that he is probably going to become a bigger player because he is trying to raise up the Aldan to fight back against the Lethari. The main thing that I'm hoping we get from this next section is more familiar characters, and it has been confirmed that Tok the Younger, who is now called Tok the Unlucky, he is somehow on this continent. Not really sure how he's got there, but he's with the Grey Swords, who were introduced in book 3. I think they were the group that initially worshipped Fenner, but now they've transferred over and they're now worshipping Tog and Fandere. There seems to have been quite a few references to book 3, which is really interesting, because at one point, I think it was in the prologue, they were talking about these canoes, and when I heard that, the way that they were described, I was thinking, wasn't that something from book 3 with the Barghast? I'm sure there was a point where the Barghast were trying to petition to get back the canoes from their ancestors. Hopefully you know what I mean, but I feel like we're gonna get some, recurring or new returning characters in this book, and that's what I want right now. I've spoken about this before, but I do struggle with Stephen Erikson's character writing. I think sometimes it's a bit too ambiguous and there's too much that is not confirmed, and I don't enjoy having to speculate on why a character is doing something a certain way or why they are feeling something in a certain way. I find it easier to enjoy reading about characters when I've spent more page time with them. That, I think, is pretty much all I have to say at this point. I haven't really talked about Rulad. We haven't really seen much of him other than he seems to be kept isolated from a lot of the Adur, and there's a concubine, a consort, who I think is trying to help him. I'm not really sure, like we haven't had many chapters from her, but she is an interesting character. Now that I'm talking about it, it's really interesting because my main mindset while I was reading was I'm kind of bored and I don't know if I care about a lot of this, but now that I've actually spoken through all of the different threads and all of these different seeds that have been planted, I'm kind of intrigued to see how stuff grows and develops. So hopefully this second part will be much more engaging, because I have struggled with certain chapters where it's just felt like a lot to get my head around, and I don't enjoy feeling that when I'm 7 books into a series. I have made it to the end of part 2 in Reaper's Gale, and I'm very happy to say I enjoyed part 2 a lot more than part 1. As soon as Carcer and Icarium arrived in Latharis, that for me was the moment where I thought, yes, this is what I'm reading this book for, because it's very clear that we're building up to some kind of confrontation. I don't know whether it's going to be a confrontation between Carcer and Icarium, or whether it's going to be Carcer and Rulad, or Icarium and Rulad. Something is going to happen at some point, and I'm excited to see how that all plays out. It feels really intense. Carcer is still being Carcer. He's not my favourite character, but you know what I really like? I really like Samar Dev and how she reacts to him. I feel like she reacts how I react to Carcer being Carcer. That exasperation and that big sigh, here we go again, rolling her eyes. And there was a really great moment where Ublala broke into where they're staying, where all of the champions are being kept, and you can just see Samar Dev getting more and more kind of there's 2 of them now. And then Carcer decides this plan. I think he's told Ublala to bring together all of the Tarthanol or the Toblakai from around this area that he's going to lead. And Samar Dev is like, do you really think this is a good idea? And Carcer we know that he's one of the most stubborn characters. I feel like there's been a lot of setup for stuff that's potentially going to happen either later in this book or later in the series. Going back to Icarium, as soon as he stepped off the boat, there was this building that collapsed, and it has pretty much been confirmed that he's been to this continent before, and loads of people within this city are panicking. He's seen as this big threat, obviously. We know that we've already seen that he's extremely powerful. It does feel like we're building up to something catastrophic, and I don't have all of the pieces yet, but I feel like Icarium is somehow linked to these mechanisms that are being found in the city that don't quite fit together. It also feels like a civil war is about to break out. We've seen how the Lathari and the Eda, there's that tension there because of this secret police organisation situation. They killed Nissel, the Emperor's concubine. That was shocking. I didn't see that come in. I thought that she was going to become a more prominent character. Something I do want to talk about, and I've talked about this in previous videos, but I wanted to go over it again. I don't like the amount of sexual assault in this series. I think it's because I've read some books that have handled sexual assault so well, and I don't feel that Malazan lives up to that standard. I don't necessarily think that Steven Erikson handles sexual assault badly. There's been moments where I've thought, oh, I don't quite like that. Generally, for me, it's just okay, and I don't want to read about something like sexual assault if it's just being handled in an okay way. For me, I would rather it just not be there. Seren is a good example where her assault in Midnight Tides, I appreciated how it wasn't on page, and I appreciated how the effort was made afterwards to show how that trauma had impacted her. But I also feel like that's the bare minimum that should be done when a character is going through some kind of trauma. Reaper's Gale then opens up with us learning that Kettle has been raped, and there's a moment between Seren and Kettle where Seren says, oh, that is something that is going to stay with you for a long time. But we don't really delve into how Kettle is feeling in that situation. It seems to have just been forgotten about. I don't know if it's going to be mentioned again later in the book. We also have this new character, Janeth, who goes through this horrendous torture. She's then rescued by Bug, and he seems to be doing something to heal her mind. There was a moment where they were talking about it, and it seems like she's being prevented from feeling the weight of that trauma. And it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable when stuff like that happens. I don't understand what the purpose is in putting a character through a trauma if you're just going to use magic to not have them fully process it and go through that effort of showing how it has impacted them. It does make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I would rather it just not be there. If you're not going to take the time to show a character be impacted by something horrific that has happened to them, why put it into the book? I'm not saying that an author should never talk about SA, but there has been a lot of it in this series. What else has happened in this last part? So there's also some interesting stuff going on with Featherwitch and the Errant. The Errant, it seems like, so I think this links back to the end of book 5 where this demon, I don't know whether demon is the right word, but something was trapped under the city, and the Errant seems to have been infected or impacted by that and has started to take on that mindset. There was this moment where he was talking about trying to challenge Gano's Paran, the master of the deck, and it seems to me like Featherwitch and the Errant, because they're now linked, they're trying to either get into the deck of dragons or there's something going on there. That was cool. I'm really interested to see how that develops, because I think Gano's Paran has just arrived in Latharis. Fenna has also been skulking around, hiding in the city. Don't know what's going to happen there. And then we've also learnt about this new group of people called the Shake. Twilight is a character that I think we first met in book 5, and then she was also at the end of book 6. And she is the queen of the Shake, and they seem to have some kind of connection to the K'chain Chamale. I couldn't quite grasp what they were talking about, but there was a part where they were talking about the K'chain Chamale and how they used to have live births, but now seemingly they infect these people of the Shake, and that's how they're now giving birth to the young K'chain Chamale. I don't know if I've understood that right. Udinaz also had this dream at one point where Menador and the Errant were fighting over him, and he turned to Menador and said, I am not yours to give away. Again, trying to understand what happened. It seemed like he came out of that dream but went maybe into Kettle's dream, and Kettle was telling him, oh, that temple that you were just at has now collapsed. And then she says something about how he's going to get very upset and cry at some point, but that it's going to be okay. And I feel like that's foreshadowing something that's about to happen. Onraktrul and Quick Ben have arrived in this place where Onrak has now become human again. And Sam, I was talking to Sam about this because I didn't have a clue what was going on there. I initially thought, oh, well, maybe it's because they've arrived in Latharis and we know that the dead stick around in Latharis, they don't move on. But he pointed out in book 5, Udinaz went to this place that I think was where the Aerosol was, and also Udinaz's son was there, and there were Talan Imas there who were human, so maybe it makes more sense that that's where they've gone. There was also a very brief moment with Hedge, who comes across Talan Imas. Don't know what's happening there. And then just in general, there's been quite a lot with Bug, aka Male, who we are seeing become less and less passive. There was a part where the Eren was thinking about Male and how he's been inactive for so long, and his followers who we've met, one of them, Malik Rel. I feel like we've met quite a few followers of Male, but Malik Rel in particular we know is not a nice guy. The Eren is thinking what's going to happen now with the followers of Male, because he is, you know, he's gaining power from them worshipping him, but they've been able to do whatever they want for so long because he's just left them to it. So is that foreshadowing? I feel like I'm reading too much into a lot of this stuff, but is that foreshadowing something that's going to happen? Maybe not in this book, but maybe later in the series. Bug is, because we know that Bug is actually, he seems like a decent enough person. Is he at some point gonna do something where his followers are gonna get their comeuppance? I don't know. I feel like we're now at a point where things are really getting going. There's a lot that's been happening, but not so much action. And I feel like we've got the groundwork now. I'm ready for some stuff that's gonna really grip me. Not that there hasn't been stuff in this that has gripped me, but I have found some chapters a little bit of a slog. All of the stuff to do with the Aldan and Red Mask, that I have found just a little bit difficult to get through because it feels like it's going to be important. I don't mind learning more about this continent because in book 5 we were very much isolated on the Ida and the Lothari. But for example, this chapter ended with this battle between the Aldan and the Lothari. I'm not really big into battle scenes anyway, but especially not battle scenes between characters that I'm not that attached to. However, part 2 ended with this declaration that the Malazans have arrived. So I think we're going to get more familiar characters, and ultimately that's what I'm here for. I have reached the end of part 3 in Reaper's Gale, and so far I'm feeling a bit, I don't know about this. It's reminding me of how I felt when I was reading House of Chains, in that there were certain things that I really liked about House of Chains, but then there were also perspectives that I didn't care about, and there were parts that felt so tedious, and that's how I'm feeling about Reaper's Gale. Anything that's happening within the city, I love the politics and this build-up to the showdown between Rulad and Karsa, or Akarium. There was a really fun part actually where Karsa was being Karsa, as he always is, and he decided he wanted to go for a walk through the city. So Smardev says, I don't think that's a good idea, they're not going to let you take any weapons with you, and he says no, they're going to let me. And he just barges his way out of there, goes for a walk, comes across Ikarium, and there's this moment between them where Karsa is kind of, you know, sizing him up, and Ikarium just doesn't want to know, he's not interested. And as soon as he realises that the whole reason Karsa is behaving the way that he is towards him is because he wants to go up against Rulad first, and Ikarium says, well, go ahead, I don't care, it makes no difference to me. And they have this moment where Karsa realises that Ikarium is half Toblakai. I don't know whether we already knew that. I don't know whether it was just very cleverly foreshadowed or whether there's been hints in previous books, but when that was revealed I thought that makes complete sense. Did I know that already? I can't believe that Karsa is one of my favourite perspectives to follow in this book. I still don't like him, but also I don't think I'm meant to like him necessarily. I think I'm feeling towards him the way that I'm meant to feel towards him. At the end of part 2 I spoke about how I was really excited that the Malazans had arrived on Lothar. I loved the Malazans in the Bone Hunters. The Bone Hunters is one of my favourite books in the series so far, probably top 3 with Memories of Ice and Midnight Tides. And this is why I'm so frustrated, because Midnight Tides I would say is my favourite book in this series, my top book, and I should be enjoying this book so much more because we're in the same location and there's a lot of characters in this book that we met in Midnight Tides, and we're now continuing those storylines. When we were seeing how Tavor spoke to the Marines and explained what they were doing, where they were going, how they were going to be unwitnessed, all of that, I thought, okay, this is intriguing. Like, I'm excited to see how this develops. I just don't find it interesting that they're slowly progressing through this jungle. Maybe the intention is that I meant to find it tedious, but I also find sometimes with the Malazans, and especially with the Marines, there are so many characters, and a lot of them to me just feel like they have the same personality. I know that at some point we've got backstories to some of these characters, and I can vaguely remember those backstories, but I also feel like the way that that information about certain characters was delivered to us, it was a little bit info dumpy. Maybe that's the wrong word, but we were just given this block of text, this information about certain characters. That's how it keeps happening, I feel, and it doesn't make me feel close to these characters. I feel like me and Stephen Erikson don't have the same sense of humour, especially when it comes to the Marines, and so a lot of their interactions I'm just finding okay. It all feels very one note to me, but there are exceptions. I still love Fiddler, I like Bottle. Basically those characters where we've spent more page time with them, I like those characters and I feel invested in them. There was a little bit of backstory to Fiddler that I found quite interesting, where it was showing how him and Hedge were first given the Maranth munitions to kind of play around with. I don't know if that's the right term. Little moments like that I quite enjoy, but generally I want it to speed up and get to the point. But then also, would I feel invested in where we're going with this? I mean, is it going to be another showdown between the Malazans and the Ida? Because that's interesting how they're obviously only targeting the Ida, and the Lothari have worked this out. There was this conversation within the Patriotists where they were saying, hey, I think there's an opportunity there. So I think I'm gonna like how it all comes together. It's just feeling like a bit of a slog to get there. There was another battle that we got in this last part with the Aldan, which again, I'm really struggling to feel anything towards. It's not that I hate those parts, I'm just not particularly invested in those characters. Even Tok and Asta, maybe because it's been so long since we last saw him, I just don't feel that much of an attachment to him at this point. The stuff to do with the Sheikh is kind of interesting. I think I've already talked about this, but they are in some way linked to the Kachane Chamale, and there was a moment, I can't remember which of the Malazans was saying this, but I think it was implied that at some point they bred with the Kachane Chamale. There are these witches within this group who seem to have talons for hands, and yeah, I don't feel like I've got my head quite fully around that situation, but some of that stuff is quite intriguing. Towards the end of this chapter, Tahal and Janeth are taken by the Patriotists, and Bug tries to go after them, but instead he is sucked into this altar that I think the Errant has set up or revitalised. I don't know what the Errant's plan is, I don't know what his endgame is, but I'm intrigued to find out. And it also was foreshadowed that if Bug had told Ublala Pung the full truth and had a conversation with him, it said something about how Bug or Mail is going to look back on that moment and think how things could have turned out differently. Again, don't know what that means, but I feel like with all of this setup, this final section, there's got to be some payoff. I feel like we're going to get that showdown with Rulad that we've been building up to, and I'm really hoping that it sticks the landing, because with that House of Chains, Stephen Erikson subverted my expectations of what I thought the ending of that book was going to be, and I didn't mind it, but I don't know whether the ending of this is going to do the same thing, or whether it's going to deliver what I feel we've been building up to. Everything that we've been told so far has suggested that Rulad can't be killed, but that doesn't feel quite right, because it's the crippled god's power that is keeping Rulad alive, that is resurrecting him over and over again. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen there, but I am intrigued to find out. I have now finished Reaper's Gale, and I have so many mixed thoughts on this book. I'm going to start with the more negative thoughts, and then we'll work our way through to the parts that I actually liked. There were some incredible moments towards the end of this book. One of my favourite moments, I think, in the series so far, but there's also stuff that I didn't like. This is one of my least favourite Malazan books so far, and I'm going to try and talk through my thoughts without ranting too much, but the main thing that I hated about the book as a whole was Janeth's storyline. I hated that when we met her, she was being horrifically tortured. She's then rescued and Bug decides to take away her memories. She has no choice in that, and at the time it made me feel a bit uncomfortable, but I thought, okay, maybe there's going to be a discussion about this later in the book. Maybe he's going to realise that he's taken away her agency there and they're going to have a argument about it. I obviously didn't know, and that's not what happened. She's captured, she's tortured again, and Bug once again takes her memories. Then the book ends with her marrying Tahal, and that is where I was really, really angry. Would she have married Tahal that quickly, within a few months, had she been allowed to keep her memories and process that trauma in her own way? I don't know whether this was the intention, I'm hoping not, but to me now, like in my mind, I'm thinking, did they only do that so that Tahal could marry her? I don't know whether we're going to come back to these characters later in the series. I'm assuming so, because Tahal is now Emperor of Lothar and Mael is an elder god, so maybe it's going to be addressed later in the series. I don't know. But one thing I did want to talk about is Udinaz and Seren, because gradually throughout this book I did start to feel like an effort had been made. More of an effort, I should say. I felt like I could really feel the weight that they were carrying after what happened to them in book 5. Udinaz came across just like he'd completely given up and he was lashing out at people. He was just done. Whereas the way that Seren was processing her trauma was to blame herself. There was some interesting interactions between them that I did appreciate. Kettle, if I've understood this right, I think she's killed in order to grow an Azath house in this refuge type place. I think it's either part of the Warren of Tellen or part of Omto's Falak. I was really struggling to understand what that was. There was a conversation between Quick Ben and Hedge, I think it was, where they were talking about maybe that was part of Cotillion or Shadow Throne's plan, that he wanted an Azath house to grow there so that he could get there because they'd previously travelled through the Azath houses. There's also an Azath house under the sea, I think it was an Azath house, where Kilimandros is being kept, and that was interesting. Again, don't know why Kilimandros is being kept there. Not sure how that's all gonna link in, but yeah, some of that was really interesting. The part where they were walking through Starvald Demelaine and seeing this dragon graveyard, that was a really poignant moment, I thought. It seemed like these dragons had died from natural causes, but yeah, I feel like there's going to be more there. I have a feeling that the next book may focus on the Tistandi and possibly the dragons, because at the end of the book, Clip, I think this happens in the epilogue, Clip goes to the children of Anamanda Rake and says, we need to go and find your father, but I feel like his intentions aren't the best, so we'll be interested to see how that plays out. The most emotionally impactful moment in this final part, in fact in the whole book and possibly in the series so far, the part with Beak where he sacrifices himself to save the Marines, and also some of the Tistadeur as well are welcomed into this bubble. That whole scene was so beautifully written. Me and Sam, my partner, were reading it at the same time, but I was a little bit ahead of him, and I just turned to him and I was crying, and he knew exactly what part I just got to, and I was not expecting to cry that much over a character that we'd not really spent that much time with. I think it was the moment where he goes to meet Hood and Hood is waiting for him and says, oh, your brother is here but he might not remember you, and Beak goes up to his brother and he's made him these wax figures, and I was that emotionally devastated, but I thought that was a really beautiful moment. I'm glad I started to enjoy the Malazan parts again, because I did really like the Malazans in Bone Hunters and I was hoping to continue that into this book, but I think Reaper's Gale just generally was a bit too long. I think that about 200 pages could have been cut out of the middle and it would have just felt like it flowed a bit better for me. In comparison, I didn't find Tock's death as emotionally impactful impactful. I was still able to appreciate the moment, especially because Tool is also on this continent. I think I predicted that in the beginning, not quite, because I'd forgotten that Tool was with the Barghast, but I remember from the prologue, I think, there were some boats that seemed like they were described like the Barghast boats. In some ways that did feel a bit random, but also I feel like it was foreshadowed, so I didn't mind it as much. A lot of the stuff to do with the Awl and Red Mask, I didn't love it. I was struggling to kind of care, but there was, yeah, an interesting moment with Red Mask where he's killed by the K'chain Shamale, presumably because he failed. They just decide to get rid of him and move on. So I'm interested to see whether that's going to come up again, because that whole storyline to me felt a bit random. I wasn't sure on the purpose of it and why it was included in the book. I think it was mentioned that Tok and Aster and the Grey Swords were sent by Tog and Fandere to this continent to get involved in some kind of war, and there was a sentence which said something like they got involved with the wrong war. Was the intention for them to get involved in the war between the Lethari and the Eda? I'm not sure what is happening with Akarium. I feel like a lot of his storyline was left quite open and unresolved, but he basically walks out into the city and starts manipulating stuff. He's recognised that he's been to the city before, so maybe he's regaining his memory. That whole storyline I was quite interested in, so it felt a little bit deflating that it wasn't resolved in this book, but I'm assuming that we're going to revisit it in another book. That final confrontation between Karsa and Rulad, I actually quite liked how that played out. I liked that it wasn't too drawn out, and Karsa ended up going to the crippled god's realm and saying, look, I've told you this before, I'm not interested, because the crippled god tries to offer him the sword and says, this is for you. Karsa doesn't want to know. And so I quite liked how that was revisited, and obviously Rulad ends up being killed. Trull's death, I think, was quite tragic. There was a lot of tragedy in this particular book. The way that it ends is really, really sad, but Trull ends up being killed. I can't remember the name of the guard who kills him, but I think it was one of the Patriotists. I am going to be honest, I didn't feel the romance between Trull and Seren. Seren is now pregnant, but I didn't really buy into their whole romance because I feel like they didn't really spend much time together on the page. It was kind of hinted at towards the end of book 5 that there was an attraction there, but yeah, in terms of the way that their romance played out, I think I've said this before, I don't love the way that Stephen Erikson writes romance, so I can get over that, but I'm interested to see if Seren's character comes up again. It seemed like in this book she was learning more how to use Mokra. I think that's her affiliated Warren. A lot of stuff to do with the Eren also wasn't wrapped up. Featherwitch, I think, ended up being killed, but the Eren is still very much out there. The next clip that you're going to see will be a discussion between me and my partner. We are going to be filming it in a few days, so if there's anything that I've forgotten to talk about, then I'll bring it up then. He's obviously going to be sharing his perspective as someone who is rereading the series. There's not going to be any spoilers for the later books because I haven't read them yet, so he's not going to spoil anything for me or for you. But yeah, if you're interested in that, then keep watching because I have a feeling he has some very different opinions to me. So for this final part of the vlog, we are going to be talking generally about Reaper's Gale, and in particular, I want to start by asking, what was your experience reading Reaper's Gale the second time around versus the first time that you read it? Was there much difference? Because I feel like you enjoyed Reaper's Gale a lot more than me.
Yes. I think with every book so far with the reread, I think I've enjoyed it that little bit more, just because I've noticed more of the foreshadowing, connected more of the dots, understood lots of bits which are going on the second time around, specifically with this book, because there are moments when I read it the first time where I was like, I have no clue what's really going on.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a few moments like that.
Yeah, even during the first read, I was on wikis a lot to try and, you know, figure out what was happening, but in the second time around, I definitely didn't need to do that as much. So yeah, enjoyed it a lot more just because I knew exactly what was going on. Even though I knew some of the moments were coming, I still think they impacted me just as much the second time around as they did the first. So yeah.
You want to give an example of some of those moments?
Oh, Beak.
Beak.
Absolutely, Beak.
I was shocked by how much that affected me.
Yep.
Because we've had this discussion, like the way that Stephen Erikson writes characters, sometimes it doesn't quite work for me because I feel like I need more page time with a character in order to feel connected to them. There was just something about Beak's character, I think, and just the way that that scene was written, it felt to me much more emotive than some of the other scenes, the other death scenes, especially within this book.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, I think Beak broke me the first time round. Not as much the second time round, but it still impacted me a lot.
Yeah. You lulled me into a false sense of security because you turned around to me after the chapter where Beak was introduced and said, "Oh, my favourite character has just been introduced." And I was like, oh, who's that? Beak. And so I was expecting for Beak to be a recurring character for the rest of the series. And so even in the lead up, it wasn't quite clicking what was happening. And then I realised that he was essentially sacrificing himself, and I thought, oh, and I think that's why it impacted me as well, because I was expecting him to become a more prominent character, and that's not what happened.
Yeah, my bad. But yeah, I just think how his character was written, even though we don't get much page time with some of these characters, they still impact me a lot. I think that's just how he writes characters, and how he imprints them on like my mind. It's just really well done, and it just works for me. Yeah.
Who were some of your other favourite characters in this particular book?
Oh, every single Malazan Marine. I'm sorry, but there were so many moments throughout that book where we got to the Malazan Marines and we were going from one POV to another POV to another POV. We got the callbacks to jokes from previous books, which I absolutely loved. Hellian's character, I loved. Obviously, the moments with Fiddler, Hedge, Cuttle, Gesler, Stormy, all of them. They were my favourite moments in this book with the moments with those characters. Just because I love the Marines, and I love the fact that they were written in this book specifically from the previous books with Tavor saying that they're now unwitnessed, so they're not doing this, you know, as a job for money, for fame back home, to come back to their families. They don't have any families to come back to anymore. They're doing this because they need to do it. You know?
See, I'm still a little bit, in terms of Tavor's motivations, my kind of feeling is that Tavor knows something, like she knows about the crippled god, and so that's why she's brought them there.
I think all of them do, the higher ups, because we know Whiskey Jack and Dujek did, because they had that moment in the tent in book 3 where they were talking about the crippled god, the chaining, and the fact that the Panyan Doman are being controlled by the crippled god. And I think Tavor knew specifically that the Ida were being manipulated by the crippled god as well, and that's why she's not necessarily just for vengeance because they've killed Malazan civilians or whatever,
because they're not even part of really the Malazan Empire anymore.
Oh, the Malazans. No, they're not. Like I said, they're unwitnessed. They're the bone hunters. They're their own.
So that's why I was kind of thinking, well, hang on a minute, the Ida and the Lether, they think that they're there for vengeance. And I was thinking, I don't feel like that's right. That doesn't seem to line up because they're not part of the Malazan Empire anymore. So why would they?
They're unwitnessed. Tavor knows that this needs to be done still. You know, to protect the Malazan Empire, even though she's not officially part of the Malazans. But this is not just about the Malazans anymore. This is about like the world itself. This is every civilization within it, you know, which could be affected. So I think that's her motivation right now, in coming to Lether as part of this journey as being unwitnessed.
Yeah, that was my assumption.
Yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, a big part of this book was Trull and Onrak as well. And Onrak became a real boy again. I love that. I love that. That's the part of the book which the first reread I was really confused about, that whole refugium place where, you know, the souls or the ghosts of the Tilan Imas became Imas again. Yes,
because my interpretation from what was said in this book is that it's a part of the Telen Warren, but that it's trapped within Omto's Falak. It's almost like there's like a crossover. That was kind of my interpretation. But yeah, I was quite confused on that.
Yeah.
But then there's been quite a few moments to do with like the magic in the world where I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to roll with this and just go with it. And maybe at some point it will be explained. But I feel like I don't need to get caught up on this. Just accept it.
Yeah. But I think the coming together of Udinas's posse you know, with Fear, Silchas Ruin, Kettle, and Seren, with, you know, Trull on the brothers coming back together
See,
again.
that, it didn't even click,
yeah.
Until right as it was about to happen, and I was like, hang on a minute, Trull and Fear are brothers.
Yeah, I know. And again, I like the reflection from way back at the prologue of book 5, where Scabandari stabs Silchas Ruin in the back. Even though I don't think that's what Fear wanted to do, he knew that it might have been the only way to save Trull, because he was obviously fighting against him at that point. And obviously that cost him his life, you know. And then using Kettle with the...
I thought that was quite an interesting moment.
With the Finest to stop the opening, I think, of Starville Demlane.
It's also confirmed that she's a Fulcral Assail as well.
Part Fulcral Assail soul as well.
Because someone, I can't remember who it is, someone who isn't part of that group says, oh, what's Udinaz and Seren or whatever doing with a Fulcral Assail?
But it's interesting because there's also, she's also part Eris as well, I believe. But yeah, that coming together, I think Kettle knew as well. I think when everybody was screaming and fighting in that group, I think it was Wither that was next to Kettle. And this is what it's like being human, Wither said, and Kettle was just like, that makes things a bit easier then. I think she knew that she was going to be sacrificed, and a Zath house was going to be created from her and this Finest. I know you weren't the biggest fan of the all plotline, but what did you think of like the culmination at the end with the battle, with the Barghast coming in, with Red Mask, the Kachincha Mail?
So those were the parts throughout the book that I really struggled with, and I've already talked about that a little bit throughout the vlog, but I think for me, because I clocked it right at the start that there were Barghast boats on Lether.
Yeah, I didn't clock that. First time round, I did not spot that one. I recognised that there were canoes, that loads of them, but it didn't come back to me, obviously, in book 3, where the same kind of canoes were put under, I think, Kapustan.
Yeah.
And they could be taken apart and stuff like that. So when you said that to me right at the beginning of the book,
I clocked it straight away. It didn't click with me, though, that would mean Tool would be with them, because I'd forgotten where he left off.
Yeah.
And so like when that happened and when the Barghast showed up, I think if I hadn't clocked in the beginning that there were Barghast boats there, to me that would have came out of nowhere, and I would have thought, hang on a minute.
There were moments in the book as well where it was kind of hinted at as well, not just the boats. There were barrows, I think, which were created by the Barghast, you know, with the white faces. And also there was a moment of the sister of the kid who died by the Kachincha Mail in the Lether camp when they were attacking together to get all the herds and stuff. That kid was taken by the Barghast.
What did you think of Tok? I was going to say Tok the Younger, Tok and Asta's death.
Tragic.
Yeah.
I think Erikson can do tragedy really, really well, and I think he did it at multiple moments in this book, with Tok the Younger not being able to, or, you know, moments away from reuniting with Tool, you know, this friend that he'd gathered. But I thought that was tragic. The pain that you felt from radiating from Tool, again, from his wife's perspective, was horrific. The same with Trull, you know, being killed off right at the end, after he'd just found Seren again. Again, tragic.
What did you think of Trull and Seren?
Well, we both know that Erikson can't really do romance very well, and I agree with you that it was, I wouldn't say forced, I just find it, because we didn't have many moments with both of them together, it just felt like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess they're, you know, either way, I think it was still well done, and I still think that, you know, right at the end we knew that Seren was pregnant, and there's hints in this book where her baby is going to be very important going forward. Where
would you rank this in terms of the other books? I might have already asked you this actually in the Bone Hunters vlog, but
yeah, I don't think it's up there with Bone Hunters and Memories of Ice for me. I think it's just behind them. I think it would be lower if not for Beak.
Okay.
Because every time I think of Reaper's Gale, every time I think of Malazan, Beak just radiates in my head.
At the end, when we were talking, at the end of the Bone Hunters vlog, when we were talking about Reaper's Gale, and you said, oh, Reaper's Gale has one of the most impactful moments for me in the entire series. Is that what you were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. See, I think I said this after we'd finished the book.
Yeah.
One thing that I said is I think the Reaper's Gale, especially that final like 20 to 30%, I think it has some of the best moments in Malazan.
Yeah.
But as a whole book, I was more bored than I've been in previous books.
Yeah, okay. No.
So that's why I feel very mixed about it.
Yeah, I think just the Beak moment, just how Erikson wrote his character, how he was able to visualize these candles in his head, and each of them had a different color, and all those colors mapped out to different warrens, and how knowledgeable he was about everything that was happening around him, and how scared he was about coming forward and stuff like that, and how happy he felt as well being part of that group with Farad and Sort, going about helping his friends, sacrificing himself. And then the moment when he was looking through all the bodies of all the Malazans and seeing all their ailments and seeing, all the pain that and all the suffering that all these characters have gone throughout this journey that we've already been through, and through their childhoods, and healing them and causing their hair and all that kind of stuff to go white. The moment with Fiddler going back and taking the Eda and bringing them into Beak's, bubble, was really impactful. And then the moment that stood out for me even more was when Hood himself came and took Beak through Hood's gate so he could be with his brother again. That moment, was incredible.
One thing that we haven't spoken about actually is Icarium and Karsa.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
Didn't it?
See, I was shocked again by how much I actually liked Karsa's perspective. It was, you know what? It wasn't Karsa's perspective I liked.
You like Samar
Dev.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as a duo, I think they're one of the most engaging duos that Erikson has written throughout the series for me.
And I really like Karsa in this book because he is shown as, again, just a brute who just wants to, prove himself and, to in this combat, but he obviously doesn't want to be controlled, and he knew full well what he needed to do in that moment, to travel through to the crippled god, putting Rulad out of his misery, and then basically giving the big middle finger to the crippled god and then walking away.
There was a great moment actually with, what's his name, the guy who made the sword?
Withel.
Yeah, when he's talking to him, and Withel said, mentioned that it was him who made it, and Carter just goes, "Don't do it again,"
and then just walks off. Yeah.
Just Carter being Carter.
It's just Carter being Carter, absolutely.
And then Icarium, one of my other favourite characters. That I feel like because we didn't get Icarium's perspective really throughout this book. We were just seeing him from other people's points of view.
But yeah.
And the whole time I was thinking, what's going on? What's in his mind? What is he thinking? Because he seemed like he wasn't interested in fighting Rulad.
He was more interested in this machine that had been hinted at throughout that whole beginning of the book, that had been intersected throughout, left through all these different machines.
It was left very open, and my interpretation was that he was trying to do because it references Cruel, and he's like, it seemed like he was trying to do what Cruel did in terms of forming warrens. And I was like, is that possible? Again,
You got 3 books to find out.
I know, I've just kind of reached a point where, everything's possible.
But it's good that you picked up on the Cruel thing, because, that line to me, when I read it, I'm like, well, we know Cruel created the warrens from his own blood.
That's immediately where my mind went. I was like, is that what Icarium's trying to do?
Yeah. See.
Yeah. 3 more books to find out. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we've covered the main things. I think, like you said, I wasn't very heavily focused on the All or invested in the All plot line. as much as the Letha and Ida, you know, battle, culture battle that was happening. I thought that was great. I loved the bits with the Malazan Marines. But yeah, there were moments in that book as well for me where I'm just like, okay, let's
speed it up.
Speed it up. Let's keep going on to the next bit. You know, I want my Malazan Marines back, please. But yeah, excited to continue though.
Yeah, very excited. We are going to be picking up Toll the Hounds at some point before the end of the year.
Yeah, that's the last one we're going to be finishing this year, isn't it? Yeah.
And then I've heard that Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God are best read close together. So plan is to read those in the new year. But Toll the Hounds will be happening before the end of 2025, which is exciting. And then are you going to join me again for this vlog?
Yeah, at the end, yeah, sure.
That vlog? Cool. Right, that's everything from us. So let us know in the comments any of your thoughts and feelings on Reaper's Gale. Otherwise, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.